And welcome back to Richo. Joining me in the studio tonight is Lee Rhiannon. She's a senator now for New South Wales. She's formerly in the upper house in New South Wales. So she's been around a while. She's done a few circuits of the course. She's an experienced and tough lady. And she's joined us tonight. Lee Rhiannon, now, can I ask you about this preference issue? Because obviously that is the big game at the moment. Why shouldn't Labor consider putting you last? What's wrong with it? Because you do it to them a fair bit.
Well, how we decide our preferences, and our local groups and individual members have a huge say in this, is that we look at the policies of parties and we preference candidates and parties according to who has the position closest to our own. So Labor have rarely come last. We've sometimes exhausted and not allocated preferences. That's the case. But here we have this very interesting situation where one of the factional leaders, Mr. Howes, is now saying that the Greens should always be preference last. Now, that's really sending a message to the voters and to Labor and Labor members as well, that we have this Labor leader who's saying he wants to put Mr. Abbott before the Greens. So does he want to put a position that really puts work choices Mark II before workers' rights, that puts towing the boats back before refugee rights?
Yeah, but you do the same thing. Now, look, I only had a quick look today because obviously I'm a busy fella. I can't spend my life doing these things. But I just pulled out a few state seats in the last state election because in New South Wales, because you and I are from New South Wales, yeah, and all around us. So I look at just a few: East Hills, Monero, Newcastle, Oatley, Rockdale, Strathfield, seats all over the place. So not focused in any one area. And the number of exhausted votes ranged in those seats from nearly 6,000 to 1.5. And all of those seats Labor lost and would have won if you'd allocated preferences. There'll be more. I didn't, as I said, try and get them all.
Let's remember the last election. That was where Labor was so on the nose. We'd had all that corrupting influence of political donations and the overdevelopment that was really turning people off Labor. And so we didn't preference the Liberals in any of the seats. Mr. Swan, the Treasurer, got that completely wrong this week. We didn't preference the Liberals or the Nationals.
I didn't say you did.
No, you didn't, but I wanted to correct that record because there's so much misinformation about our position on preferences. But in that election, Graham, you know how bad it was for Labor, and the Greens distanced ourselves from a party that was causing a lot of damage to this state. Now, it wasn't that we were pro-coalition. We were working for a better outcome for the people of New South Wales.
But it's the same as what if I was in the Labor Party, I'd argue exactly the same thing back at you, because in the end, the same result happens. You elected Liberals. By not preferencing Labor, you elected Liberals. You know you did. There's no other way of looking at it.
No, but the Labor caused the wipeout of themselves. We're not responsible for the damaging attitude that people end up having towards Labor, because they were on the nose, and on the nose badly, Graham.
Yeah, but I mean, I could argue were I in the Labor Party, and well, I'm still a member of the Labor Party. I can't say I'm not, but obviously I don't take part in it today. But why couldn't I say to myself, look, every time I look at a poll, it's obvious to me, because certainly if you look at some of the qualitative stuff, not just the quantitative stuff, that an association with the Greens hurts Labor with some voters, some of its voters. It does. So why can't I say, well, you know, an association with you is really hurting us. You're on the nose. You're only worth 12%. Therefore, I've got to move away from you. I could argue the same thing, could I not?
Well, you could, but is that really where you want to position Labor at this time in the 21st century, where people are looking for solutions? The world's changing very quickly, and you've already got a range of policies. Some areas we agree on and we can work on, and we have worked quite successfully in the federal parliament. You know, all this legislation has been passed because we've been able to cooperate. There are some sharp differences, and that's how alliances often work when you're in parliament trying to work on these issues. But if Labor chooses to go down Mr. Howe's path, that's going to be so damaging for Labor. I've been on the road, actually. I've just come back today from northern New South Wales, and people are really over that fighting that they're seeing in Labor, and where it's just this scrabbling. And it's a scrabbling over power, not over looking to what the people of this country need. That's what's going on here, Graham.
Mind you, I hear different things on the streets as well, because, I mean, people approach me every day. I can't go one city block without people talking to me, and I constantly get an argument about how being associated with the Greens means Labor's associated with people who want to get rid of jobs. And that's how you're seen by a lot of people, whether it's true or not, it's not relevant. That's how it's seen, because I think it's always the case, isn't it? Perception's reality. But look, I just go back to, if you look at the 1990 election, when I had a bit to do with it, and the Greens preference Labor everywhere, and between that and a higher preference from the Democrats that Labor had ever received, Labor won an election, which it wasn't supposed to win. Now, I remember all of that well, but of course the Greens aren't the same Greens. I never got asked at any meeting I had with Greens, and in 3 years I met with Greens every single day, every day, all over Australia. There wasn't a corner of the country I didn't crawl through. And no one ever asked me about how we'd treat the banks. Nobody ever asked me about anything except trees. Now, no one in the Greens ever talks to me about trees, ever.
But I think, Graham, look, I'm happy to talk to you about forests right now, the forest protection we need. We've got a big campaign about precious places around this whole countryside. Bob Brown, one of his big campaigns at the moment is about the protection of the northwest of the country because of the pressure from the gas industry there. So we're out there doing all that work around trees and protection of our native natural environment. So that's as important to us as it has ever been, but we're a political party, policies across the board, from everything from industrial relations to refugee rights, public services, and that's what people want. They want a political party that has comprehensive policies, and I'm proud of that.
Well, when did you join the Greens?
In 1990.
1990?
Yes.
And so before that you weren't in them. So all I can say is this: the Greens have evolved and changed. Now, when I look at your record over the decades, and that includes the decades before then, do you consider yourself a Green first or generally a leftist person first? What's more important to you, the trees or the other things that we're talking about now?
Well, for me, it all goes together, Graham. It's probably not an answer that might satisfy you.
No, but I just wonder, because I never got questions about anything except trees. Now, they don't seem to get a run.
Oh, well, they get a run. It's often, being frank about it, hard for us to get our voice heard. One of the portfolios that Bob Brown asked me to take on was forests, which I'm really enthusiastic about because long ago I was a botanist. And we talk about these issues so much, but it's hard to get the run. There's still a lot of work we do that doesn't gain the media coverage that we believe it warrants. And that's one issue that I think we should be talking a lot more about.
Well, I wonder where this all finishes. Now, is there ever going to be a time when you can do, you talk about being a political party, you've got to have all these policies, you also have to have the capacity to deal. Now, dealing with the Greens is pretty difficult if you're going to always say, our way or the highway, which is basically what you say.
That's just so not true, Graham. And seriously, our track record in the federal parliament demonstrates that that's just old journalism, and I'd say a bit of a lazy way of looking at it. Because right now, in the federal parliament, and often your people often boast about this, Mr Albanese's line, about all the hundreds of pieces of legislation that have gone through. How have they gone through? Because the Greens and obviously some of the crossbenchers are there negotiating. Now, for us, most of that legislation doesn't match our policy, but overall it is an improvement on the current situation. So on higher education, obviously the carbon package and many other pieces of legislation, overall an improvement, and we were willing to pass them.
But what about the big argument we've just had, boats, which is huge, and where I've agonised over it, as I'm sure everyone in that Parliament did, and many other Australians, because as you probably know, I supported I opposed the Malaysian solution all the way through. I was a supporter of onshore processing. All of that, and I'm on record too many times to walk away from it, but I have walked away. And the reason I walked away was I just couldn't continue to watch people die. And I thought to myself, well, then you've got to put all the options on the table. So here was I suddenly saying, well, all right, I'll support the Malaysian solution, and I'm disappointed that the Liberals wouldn't. But whatever happened, the Greens weren't part of the conversation, because you were saying, this is it, this is where we stand, we don't move. It was almost a mirror of a Tony Abbott position.
No, that again, so not true. Like in that week that was very intense around the refugee bill that came in that last week in June of the parliamentary sitting, my colleagues, Senators Christine Milne and Sarah Hanson-Young, led our negotiations and negotiated hard and had a really clear position.
But where did you negotiate? What ground did you give?
Well, where they're putting up proposals about money going for the UNHCR, operations in Indonesia in particular, increasing our intake of humanitarian refugees, increasing the intake of refugees.
Well, even Tony Abbott wanted to do that.
Well, we've been saying for a long time. Exactly. There is common ground here where Labor could have moved in and given leadership in that space. But what we need to remember here is, because everybody want to save lives, like, the stories are just terrible, as you've identified in this interview. But when people choose to come on a boat, what they're thinking about is escaping from their circumstances. They're not thinking about what's happening in Australia with our boat policy. And this attempt to push for deterrence, which is what that legislation was all about. It was trying to deter the boats from coming. That doesn't work. When you're a desperate family trying to escape, your Tamils trying to get out of Sri Lanka, or Afghanis trying to escape from the Taliban, you're thinking about, how do I save my family? How do I get going?
But obviously, I'm going to have to leave it here. I'm really sorry, but what we're doing doesn't work. It just seems to me that what we're doing just is failing dismally. We had to change. Look, I'm really sorry we've got to leave, because I could talk about this all night, Lee, but unfortunately...
But the government policy didn't change either, and that's what needs to change.
No, I think the government was prepared to change. It just wasn't changing in your direction. It wanted to change in the other one. Yeah. But in the end, no one agreed, no one changed, and nothing happened. And that's the great tragedy in Australian politics. This so-called negotiation resulted in no one in the end doing anything different. I always think that's sad. But I've got to leave it there. Okay, I know I've had the last say, and that's not terribly fair, but it is my show, so it's one thing I can do. We'll be back in just a moment with Tim Flannery.